Good morning and welcome to Power Platform Gaining Control from Day One. I'll be talking about key success factors for adoption and scalability across your organization. My name is Mariano Gomez, and I want to thank the Wwmstug event for inviting me and having me here. So let's move on to the agenda for our session. And we're going to go through a brief introduction. We're going to be talking about what is Power Platform. We're going to talk about some governance challenges and best practices in working with your Power Platform environment as a whole. We want to talk about understanding your data, and then we'll dive into the key success factors for gaining control. My name is Mariano Gomez Bent. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of McCormick. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer and a former Microsoft MVP for the Power Platform. I have over 25 years of experience all in the Microsoft Dynamics channel, helping customers around the world to execute their digital transformation strategies. I've traveled extensively across the world, delivering presentations like these and many more um, at Power Platform conferences, the BizApps conference, the DynamicsCon, and Summit North America, among others. So you can find me at all my social networks, which I will leave at the end of this session for you to contact me. So let's look briefly at what is the Microsoft Power Platform. The Microsoft Power Platform is a collection of AI-powered low-code development tools that enable users to build custom business applications, automate workflows, and analyze data using the power of Microsoft Azure. The Power Platform is supported by any number of services, including data connectors, AI Builder, Microsoft Database, PowerFX, and managed environments. So this as a whole forms the environment known as Power Platform. These tools, as you can tell, integrate with a host of Microsoft services, including Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, GitHub, and many more. It's also been extended to incorporate third-party services through the use of connectors, which we'll be talking about shortly. But let's look at the challenges and best practices around the overall governance of Power Platform. So a few of the things that you're trying to prevent, of course, is data loss. And data loss happens in many ways, whether that's accidental deletions, abrupt changes to the environment, migration errors, especially when you're actually trying to move data between different locations or different digital assets, and certainly bugs around the connectors. And the connectors fundamentally, especially those that are using third-party services, could be a weak point within the environment. So what are your best practices here? Certainly you want to implement an environment backup strategy. And certainly, like you would test any database backup, you also want to make sure that you can recover those databases at the end of the day. You want to implement the same situation with your environments. You want to also take advantage of environment groups. That's something that is fairly new here in the Power Platform, and I will be talking a little bit more about environment groups down the road. And certainly, you want to implement a DevOps strategy. And that's especially true if you're developing applications, workflows, and every type of objects using the capabilities of the Power Platform. It's also a good habit to back up your data to ensure you don't permanently lose it. That's more or less a good standard overall across the board. When you're choosing backup solutions, especially if you're going to delegate that to a third-party system, there are any number of good and tools out there that will help you back up things like workspaces, permissions, reports, and event activities, along with fast and comprehensive restore. So if you don't want to do this yourself, there are tools out there to help you with these events. Certainly, another one of the challenges, governance challenges, is unmonitored objects and uncontrolled environments. So you want to always be aware of who made what, when, and where within your environments. You want to have, you have to distinguish between long-term and short-term objects. You certainly want to control duplicate objects, orphan objects, and the growing number of environments that could probably lead to sprawling. And that's something that I've seen very commonly across customers that implement Power Platform initially without a strategy. So best practice is you want to make sure that every object has ownership, whether that's makers versus your end users. You certainly want to implement a lifecycle management for your environments, and that goes along with your DevOps strategy, where you will probably have dev, QA, production, and certainly a playground that allow users to experiment and try in a very controlled manner. Another one of the challenges that I see around governance is the resurgence or the surgence of shadow IT services. So basically, what that comes down to is when environments are very restrictive and users don't have a way to uh, try and learn, there is a chance that those services will be requested elsewhere. So that's when users start to go out of the regular IT controls that you have in place in your environment to basically request those services be enabled. That may introduce security risks, of course, and certainly the use of unsafe connectors and basically look at unmonitored data inflow and outflow into your environments. That's one way of actually getting yourself in trouble. And basically, as I mentioned initially, the difficulty in requesting access to the right services. So you want to make sure that, as a best practice, you have proper training in place, establish and document procedures for requesting access to connectors, establish a playground where users can actually train and set the right DLP policies, data loss prevention public policies to that environment. And there, definitely, you want to have some sort of delegated administration in place with role-based access control procedures. So we've been talking about data. So we have to understand exactly what that data is. There are two types of data. There's personally identifiable data, which is the data that is a representation of you as a person. As an example, you can think of things like your first name, last name, social security number, those type of things. Those are actually personally identifiable pieces of data that need to be taken into account and consideration when you look at your data strategy. And certainly there's the organizational data, which is basically a representation of you, your customers, and your business. So if you have things like in this type of situation, things like SOC 2 controls become very prevalent, especially if you're in certain type of industries, or maybe you have to meet HIPAA compliance. So these are things that you want to be taking into account. Let's look at data access and storage then. So as part of understanding where those things sit, you want to refer back to this Power Platform diagram representing the overall um, components of Power Platform. So if we're talking about data specifically, things will reside either in Dataverse or in data connectors, especially with the inflow and outflow of data. So you want to make sure that those are points that you are actually securing and looking into, especially the connectors portion. As of today, there are approximately 1,400 plus pre-built plugins and connectors that cover just about every Azure data service and the most common enterprise data platforms. But there are things like LinkedIn, or there are things like X or Facebook, and those are the type of connectors that you probably want to take a second look at and see what users are basically exploiting to push data out to other environments. Um, and that basically will give you an idea as to what are the data loss prevention controls that you want to implement. Taking a look at Microsoft Dataverse, it's an environment where basically you can store data, design all sort of data models, and put those in place. It's actually supported by the Common Data Model Services, but you also have the ability to store advanced business logic and eventing that you can place on calculated fields and roll-ups to auto-duplicate detection. Okay, you have also a robust security and compliance and management capabilities, and is basically a one-stop shop for interfacing to Synapse and Fabrics. So, if you want to conduct advanced analytics, that's where you will be conducting most of your data migration or your data push to those services. Continuing with what is Dataverse? Obviously, it's an API first environment, and you can think of it as, again, surrounded by the collection of services that we already described. There's also a security layer where you can do things like authentication, authorization, and auditing. There's a logic layer where you can do and implement jobs, business rules, duplicate detection, enable plugins, calculated and roll up fields. You certainly can intersect with the data level, which allows you to store your data models, perform data validations, supported by the common data services. You can actually do mobile or offline reporting and data storage. And you also have the ability to implement catalogs and discovery. Then there's the storage of that data. So you can actually implement relational databases, file and blobs, log files, semi-structured data, and certainly all in a data lake environment. And it has integration capabilities where you can actually implement things like event to webhook, virtual tables and connectors, export data to SQL, export to Lake, and event to hub type operations. So that said, let's look at the key success factors for gaining controls. And I'm actually going to bring to light five key success factors. But the key success factor number one then is implementing a data loss prevention strategy. And that basically centers around your environment strategy as a whole, implementing your tenant-wide data policies, which will basically set the, if you want to call it somehow, set the ground or lay the ground and the foundation for what's going to occur across your entire set of environments. Then, as I said, new with Wave 2 of 2024 was the introduction of environment groups, where you can then set more specific policies that are applied to a certain group of environments. And before you actually define your environment specific policies. And finally, you want to enable tenant isolation to prevent cross tenant data exchange, which will even produce a more secure environment. So let's take a look at environment strategies as a whole. And what you don't want to do here is you certainly don't want to underestimate the power of a great environment strategy. Okay, and this is basically one of the first steps that you want to implement to manage your entire ecosystem. If you don't understand where things are and you are able to categorize the solutions correctly, then things will be a lot easier to support in the long run. Um, Fundamentally, you want to understand where people are making things, whether those are agents in Copilot, whether those are flows, whether those are apps. You want to make sure you understand at all times where those are and how you will be able to support them going forward. So let's take a look at a simple environment strategy where you have obviously the global tenant capabilities. You're going to have your environment groups, right? And then ultimately, you're going to have a simple production UAT and dev strategy for a particular solution. You want to make sure that you're using ALM, and that's something that I'm going to talk about in down the road from here, because ALM is what's going to allow you to move your solutions between any of those three environments. In addition, you can have a second environment group where you have yet another solution also going through the same process, surrounded by a team production environment and probably an experimental environment where you do and try things before you even move into the development process. And finally, you have your personal, what I call a personal productivity environment, fundamentally in your default environment in Power Platform. So this is at a very high level what a simplistic environment that is focused on a tiered approach would look like. So those are things that you can model before you even get into the nuts and bolts of actually setting up environments in Power Platform. Now, this is actually a more complex ecosystem where you have obviously you're doing things in uh, Dataverse for Teams, right? So you're setting up apps and or agents in Dataverse for Teams. You also have that you're running Dynamics 365, whether that's finance and operations or even customer engagement. Uh, you will have obviously a production and development QA test environment. Hopefully, you're using deployment pipelines to move things between those different environments. But you also have, for example, in our case, at my company, we actually do ISV development. So we actually have an actual environment where we do, or a set of environments where we do product development. So as you can tell, this is much more of a strategized environment or ecosystem of environments, if you want to put it somehow, where we are also breaking things down by different IT projects. So if we have research and development, uh, 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 you know, projects that we're trying to get through, we would set up the different environment strategies for those. So it allows, for the most part, a self-contained place for each different team to do their own work and have more of a different strategy around how we actually get things to production. So it's not simply that we have a single self-contained environment like in the previous case, but now here we're servicing different teams and have different purposes. So, what would you do in this case? What you want to do is you want to configure your tenant-wide policies, as I mentioned initially. I would definitely start looking into setting up environment groups as part of a comprehensive strategy, and then aggregate environments into those environment groups. Okay. New with Wave 2 of 2024 also was the introduction of managed versus unmanaged environments. So you want to start looking into that, where obviously most likely your production environments will all become managed environments. Your dev and QA environments maybe not so much. Um, Also, you want to look into determining the type of environments that you will be creating. Which ones will be development, which ones will be QA, production, or even the playgrounds where you will allow users to do most of their test work and actually play with different connectors, or maybe look at the capabilities of certain features without affecting how your production, development, and QA environments will work. And certainly, you want to determine at this point what connectors will be used or supported within the organization. As I tend to say, all connectors are guilty until you can prove that those connectors will work effectively within your organization. So you will be looking at things like their security parameters. You'll be looking at things like how the vendors support those connectors, etc. The following is just a quick show of how you would set up an environment group. And as you can tell, you start by defining your environment name, giving a solid description of it. You will then go ahead and set up the different rules that will apply in that environment, and finally publish those rules, and then aggregate the different environments to that environment group that you just created. Now, as far as policies go, keep in mind that environment groups inherit all the policies initially from the tenant that had been established at the tenant level, where you can then go and refine them for the different environments that you create. All right, so let's see how you enable tenant isolation. This is actually surprisingly one of the things that is overlooked very often in the deployment of Power Platform. I don't know why, but I don't know if it's not talked about enough, but you want to also make sure that tenant isolation is something that you consider within your environment. Tenant isolation will prevent data going across different tenants without you knowing it, which is something that certain connectors can do. So this is something that I strongly recommend as part of your strategy. Okay, so basically here you would go ahead and select the tenant isolation setting, and you want to turn that on. Okay, so key success number two is understanding your ecosystem. So often you want to know who's doing what, who's building what within your organization. You also want to know where people are building and using these solutions today. And finally, you want to understand pretty much who's building solutions and who they're building them for. So this is important because in many organizations, what tends to happen is because things get out of control, you might end up deleting or or actually not be able to properly support the end users using these solutions because you don't know where they came from or how they were built or what policies were taken into account when those solutions were built. So this is these are three different aspects that you certainly want to nail down from the very get-go. So what you want to do is you certainly want to categorize users into makers and citizen developers, makers, citizen developers, and users. This is quite critical because the minute you open Power Platform to everybody in your organization is the minute you want to know who will be doing what when. You certainly want to group those individuals into teams, respectively. And this is one of the things that I see that is often overlooked, the configuration of teams. So users can actually be grouped into, for example, the financial team, the operations team, or the sales team. So that's important because it helps categorize and know what solutions will be used and given to each one of these different individuals. In addition, you want to have your makers team. Okay, and makers can basically come in different flavors. So you can have the different makers servicing these teams depending on the size of your organization, or simply one or two individuals who are developing solutions for everybody within the organization. So those are things not to be overlooked. Also, you don't want to start giving access to individual users and assign security at the individual user level. I recommend strongly that you actually enable and configure security roles, which are key cornerstone in Power Platform. And those security levels or security roles are actually can be done at the Azure level, or they can be done at the M365 level and inherited and consumed within the Power Platform. Certainly, if you're doing things that are more sophisticated, like Dynamics 365 finance and operations, you will have to define positions for these users, and preferably they match those or they are actually inherited immediately from Dynamics 365. So that's something else that allows a little bit more of control, especially if you have things like HR applications or that where you have managers and different users that are hierarchically positioned within the organization to do certain functions. So it's a lot easier to roll out capabilities in Power Platform when you have positions defined. And certainly work with hierarchical security if possible by defining business units and certainly application uses for different apps that will be running or interfacing with Power Platform. So that's a good measure. So let's take a look at how you would define a security role. And basically, you here in the security component, you would actually go and select your user and permissions within your environment, define the actual role name, right? You would then select where it applies and simply create that role. Then you will go and set the parameters that are going to define the security specifically for that particular role. So you have obviously the ability to create, read, write, etc. Those are the different capabilities across multiple different security points where you would set who has access to do just those things or not. Key success number three. This one is often overlooked, but again, remember that these are key success factors that will help you gain control of your Power Platform environment from day one. So this is one that you probably don't want to omit. Deploy the center of excellence before you start actually seeing a sprawl of environments. What you want to do immediately as you stand up your Power Platform environment is to deploy the center of excellence kit. Keep in mind that this is a collection of components and tools that were designed specifically and precisely to help you understand what's going on within Power Platform. So this is very key because this Center of Excellence kit keeps detailed inventory of all the environment components, whether you develop apps, flows, agents, reports, connectors, and certainly the solutions that hold those different things will be key to track within your environment. That's actually handled from the Center of Excellence kit. But it also has great reports around the DLP impact analysis. So if you have data loss prevention capabilities set up and configured within your environment, you can actually monitor those and see what they affect as you keep making changes to those policies. And finally, you can download the Center of Excellence kit at aka.ms COE starter kit download, and be on your way to implementing it. So this is actually a look at the administrative view, the admin view, where you can see different things that you can do here. You have a dashboard, pretty much, and you can see who are your makers, which ones are prolific makers. You can see the active environments and the different components that are grouped in each environment. Okay. You can see all the makers on one side of who are your flow makers, right? Who are your actual Power Automate makers and how many they are creating. In addition, you have a list of all the apps, the owners. So it gives you a very detailed insight into the different components within your organization. And finally, here's the Center of Excellence Starter Kit dashboard, where you can definitely perform monitoring, governance, and nurturing of the different users within your environment. And from here, you can do an entire administrative role without necessarily sacrificing insight, and have everything into one single place where you can look at everything that's going on. You can also track the adoption rate of the different things that are happening within your environment. So what has been your gainers in terms of users, in terms of objects that you're monitoring year over year. Let's talk about key success factor number 4, and that's ALM. ALM is actually fundamental in, I think, any environment, and basically ALM determines your application lifecycle. It's directly tied to your environment strategy. I can't stress that enough. So the minute you start to determine which things are going to be when you have a development, QA, and production environment strategy, that's the minute you want to start thinking about ALM, because it's going to be key in maintaining resources in repositories that A, they serve as a backup, but B, they also serve to move objects between different environments smoothly. The one thing to keep in mind with your ALM strategy is that everything is solutions driven. So if you are currently building apps or flows outside of a solution, stop that immediately and actually adapt the practice of implementing solutions for those things. Now, a solution simply groups all the different Power Platform objects that you're creating that are related to what you're doing. So I can have my HR app, and that's actually built into solution. And within that solution, I might have 2 or 3 different apps. I might have a set of flows, and I might have some intelligent agents that are doing certain operations for me, and all that is grouped in one place. So now when you are actually moving this between different environments, you don't have to go grabbing one object at a time, making the deployment even more complex. And certainly, when you're actually doing a collaborative development, which now is supported in Power Apps, you will be able to have many users, or many makers actually collaborating, and that's only possible when you're using solutions. As far as tooling goes, Microsoft has provided a number of interesting tools. You have the Power Platform build tools for Azure DevOps services, and basically, what it does is it allows me to, create, manipulate everything that is provided within Power Platform, whether it's creating new environments or, um, you know, copying the code that I've actually made um, in my apps into a repository in Azure DevOps. So that's actually a good set of tools that you want to have available. And interestingly enough, if you're using Azure DevOps, you can actually download those from the marketplace, from the Azure marketplace, right into your DevOps environment. You also have the GitHub Actions for Power Platform for those of you using GitHub. And GitHub Actions are, in essence, the same set of actions that you will find in the Power Platform build tools. All this stuff is built up on the XRM toolkit. So um, you will find very common set of instructions between the two. Unfortunately, it's not plug and play where if I wanted to move off Azure DevOps to GitHub Actions for Power Platform, I cannot go from just copying the YAML and get started immediately on the other side. That's just not possible at this point. But you will find many similarities between the two when you start working with them. And certainly you have the Power Platform command line interface. So for those of you who are actually doing Visual Studio Code development and want to handle all the ALM strategy from there, whether you want to create environments, etc., that's also possible from the command line interface in the Power Platform command line interface. And finally, there is a set of Power Platform pipelines that are delivered in one or two ways. You can actually use those from the environments directly, or you can actually use those um, from Azure DevOps or GitHub directly. So those pipelines, all they allow you to do, or not only allow you to do, but the purpose of those pipelines is to be able to handle your development strategy across different environments. So whether you actually going to take code and move it to a repository, it's done in a very automated, control way that can be leveraged with repetitively, so as to minimize the errors that you might have doing those things manually between different environments. So you can find more information here at learn.microsoft.com and /en-us /power platform ALM. So all these resources will be available to you at the end of this presentation, and you will actually have the ability to go and grab those links from this presentation. Finally, key success number 5 is nurture your community. So as we said initially, you want to know who are your makers or citizen developers. Hopefully you already know this by now, how you can help them succeed. So what resources are you going to put in place, or actually conduct surveys to see how they can improve the work that they're doing, and either send them to conferences, actually have them look at presentations like these, or presentations by other members in the community, and certainly reach out to the MVPs in the community, as they are actually great resources as well. But everything goes a long way to helping those who are actually invested in building and helping moving along business processes within the organization um, uh, to be successful in the end. Okay. One thing that I've also found very interesting is being able to actually set these individuals up, but also recognizing the efforts that they've actually placed or put in place to succeed. So traditionally, I would suggest you put reward system in place. So whether those are gift cards, whatever permissible reward system to recognize those individuals that are continuously delivering value to the organization, and certainly improving the business processes through the set of applications or workflows or agents or Power BI reports, whatever it is that these makers are building to the service of the organization. I believe it's great to reward them for that. And certainly, how can you grow the community? So if you started with one or two makers, what's going to get you four makers? What's going to get you six or eight or 10, or, if you have a large organization, 1,000 makers. So that goes to your adoption and scalability, um, or adapting and scaling Power Platform at the organization level. Okay. But one thing I want to caution is don't forget about the actual users. So just like how you implement training strategies for your makers, you also want to make sure that your end users have actual training in the applications or the flows or the different solutions that these makers are delivering. So put that as a whole strategy to nurture your organization or community. Here are some resources that I have compiled. You certainly want to look at the Power Platform Adoption Best Practices Guide that Microsoft has actually put out there. It's part of their methodology documentation. So you want to make sure you take a look at this. You want to also look in detail at how to manage data policies. And the reason why we didn't go into excruciating detail here is because data policies come one a million. So you have to be clear as to what policies you're going to put in place. But I would certainly emphasize the connectors. Connectors, once you get a hold of those connectors, once you get a control over them, then now you move to your environment and so on, and you keep scaling until you go to your tenant. And finally, you want to actually look at what the center of excellence is. You certainly want to have the ALM with Microsoft Power Platform. Take a look at the ALM with Microsoft Power Platform documentation, because it not only contains the documentation on the ALM, but it also has a really handy lab that you can use and follow to gain traction with ALM. So once you understand that via the lab, you can then go ahead and implement it as a strategy across the board. Whether you're using GitHub or Azure DevOps, the tool set, I believe, is more in line with what your organization is used to, and not necessarily that you are forced or boxed into using a specific tool. Finally, I'm putting together my presentation, my contact list, or my contact items, and you can reach me on LinkedIn, you can reach me on YouTube, or you can reach me on X with the information that is here. Feel free to always reach out. I'm always available to answer questions, get you started in the right direction, or point you to somebody who knows. As a member of this community, I also have to recognize that certain individuals out there have better skills in certain areas than I do. So that's actually a good thing about this community. You can always find somebody who does and knows a little bit more than you do, and they are willing to help as well. And finally, thank you for attending Connect, your Microsoft Technology Solutions and Trend group. And I hope you had a really good time throughout this presentation. And I'll see you soon.